Okay, Eric, I have your week 2 assignment in front of me, and we'll go through this and see how you did. I've already looked through the articulations, and they look pretty good. We'll cover those more in a second. I want to quickly just look at the base proportions and the modeling of the starting layer. Okay, so we'll start in the back, and I think you kind of have suffered the same problem that a lot of people suffered this week, and that is kind of understanding what goes on in the lower back. Again, I think people are really relying on the reference, not too much, but not reconciling it against what they know should be in the areas, things that we've learned anatomically through the anatomy course, and also just even in the last week's lessons, sculpting this guy's torso. He has really pronounced spinal erectors that create a mass either side, right? And you've observed some of that from the reference, but I think you've kind of not quite nailed the shape of it, right? So it has to be a little bit rounder and a little bit more convex. I think you've done pretty well with the this medial mass of the spinal erectors. That seems to have the right width and volume and depth, but it's just this lateral mass needs to be a little rounder and go a little higher. And just watch out for describing wrinkles and things down at the bottom, because there's the danger of making this guy look like a saggy old man, when really those are kind of relatively minor forms compared to the larger masses of the actual muscle that are creating them. Okay, the other thing that I'm just a little bit concerned about is the length of both of these scapula, right? The medial border of the scapula is going really, really long. And there's actually a measurement of this length in the model measurement sheet, as well as this length from the acromion to the medial border. It might be worth just checking those to reconcile these lengths, because I can kind of tell you just looking at this that this is by having a hard time finding its insertion up into the arm, because it's about this this bit too long, right? So we just need to kind of adjust this up, and then it should go more or less like this, straight across, and you can see how the long head will interlock quite tightly, and then the rear deltoid will interlock this way. Right, so it's small differences actually that end up making a huge impact on the coherence of a model, right? If something falls out of line by just a couple centimeters, that has knock-on effects to all the insertions that come off of that area, or all the origins and muscles that go off to insertions, and those vectors and directions of pull are a little bit off, and so the mechanism of the body starts to break down when things just are pull off a little bit. Likewise, I feel like this one is just a little bit too long as well, because proportionally most times these are almost equal length segments, as to a first degree, a first approximation. And so if you ever see anything that's stretching really long down here relative to this length, you should kind of double check. Okay, I think that's it for the back. Let's just look at the front. And in the front, I'm just going to say be careful with kind of this width here. I know it is a little bit wide through the abs, but we have to be kind of careful about things flaring out. I mentioned that before. The other thing that I think is a little bit overdone is this line, right? Whatever's happening here, this kind of long sheet. It looks like it almost looked like Batman's body armor in the movies. You know how it's just kind of modeled over the muscular forms. There's going to be a little bit more distinction and variation in here. Chest doesn't flow into that so directly. There's certainly some oblique stuff happening here, and some individual forms that are observable in the reference, but again, be very careful with kind of over modeling and overdoing those kind of transitions, because we want to just keep things a little bit naturalistic if possible. Okay. The only other thing that I'm going to say, and I think this is kind of widely applicable to a lot of people this week, is to watch the line of the biceps going up into the shoulder, right? Because yours is almost a step removed from the angle it should be, or the kind of the level it should be coming in at, meaning your biceps is too far back compared to your front deltoid. I'm just going to pull up the reference to show this. And which one am I looking for? I'm going to grab this one right here. And hopefully if I kind of enlarge this, you can see what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this line from biceps up, a little bit of front deltoid coming in front, but not nearly as pronounced as yours. So it's a little bit of a line that needs to be moved a bit forward, and kind of just reconcile that with the masses of the chest. I think maybe also some of the front deltoid could come back a little bit. It's a little bit too convex. But I would do this kind of at level 1. And I get a move brush, and I would just tweak this forward. A bit like this. Right? And that's probably about it. It's a small move, but like I said with the scapula, these kind of things add up. And you really want it to be, you want the flow to be right? So I think actually this front deltoid needs to come out like this, and bicep needs to continue up a little ways here. Right, because the front deltoid is coming out, and it's almost wrapping underneath the lateral head out here. So it's kind of teardrop shape spiraling in, and chest muscles are coming out over, remember, so we need to get this coming up like this and really get a strong interlock. So biceps still kind of filling in this gap, and you kind of see bicep up to here, biceps up to here on him. Okay, so small things, but just kind of very almost common mistakes. This is not the arm exercise, but I'm just going to take the head of the triceps back on this lateral head, because this is brachialis sitting in here. Right, so just reestablish some of those muscular distributions. Okay, that's enough for kind of the base modeling. Hopefully everybody can learn from these little things. I'll turn this layer off and we'll look at your articulations. Okay, so out to 45 degrees, pretty good. We get a little stretch in the chest, and a little articulation in the scapula. I don't really like what's happening in the lower back here. Like this is turned into a big saggy mass of something, right? And again, you think that this guy actually had there's broadly symmetric volumes going on side to side, you know. So if something like this happens, you really have to question what you're doing with the mesh. You know, if just think, man, I'm seeing something in the reference, but it doesn't kind of reconcile with what I know going on the other side, or what I know is supposed to happen anatomically, right? And it's kind of going back to where we've been already. And like all that doesn't make any sense to me. Perhaps it was a cast shadow in the reference or something, but again, don't be a slave to reference. You have to kind of use reference to inform the forms that you're building, but always do kind of a mental a sanity check between what you know and what you're observing. Okay, so just kind of fix some of that. And now we'll move the arms up again. And at this level, I want you to just be aware of the what's happening with the rear head of the deltoid. Right, just be very careful about what you're seeing, and what we know that it can't really. The rear head of the deltoid never is going to go down like this and come up. So even though we might be seeing something in the reference, we do know that that's likely going to be related to the triceps here and the long head of the triceps coming down here, right? Because the deltoid obviously has to go from its origin, which is the underside of the scapula, to its insertion out here, and it goes kind of in the least distance, right? The shortest distance, so it really pulls tight and gets out there. It doesn't do any kind of long wandering down here. Okay, and that gives us room for the triceps to interchange with the teres major as well. Okay, and now let's just go to 135, and I think that's starting to look pretty good. Starting to get some of the acromion exposed. Around the front, be careful about this, right? I can see that if I kind of do it very explicitly, put a new layer on, the clavicular section of your pecs is doing this, but really it needs to just go straight across. Remember, vector from origin to insertion takes it straight across this gap. Add to that the fact that the tricep or the clavicle is starting to roll back on itself, so all of this stuff is shifting up. This little fossa that we see on arms that are lowered really disappears on arms that are raised above 90 degrees. Okay. Likewise, we need to really prune some of this mass in side to side because this is all where the armpit starts to come in and get established. Chest muscle, the kind of sternal section is going up, and the abdominal section is going up like this, right? So this all kind of pulls in, and then you have room for the armpit back behind there. Likewise, over here. Just going to take a little volume out here because this starts to get pulled really thin, and we're starting to see the convexity of the chest instead of the convexity of, so we're seeing the convexity of the rib cage instead of the convexity of the pectoralis major, because it's really going a long ways out to the arm. Okay, let's just go to 180 degrees and see how we do. I'll turn off my layer because it doesn't make sense as much. And I'll make a new one. Sorry about that. Gonna take some of the volume out of here. Put some volume back here because you have a pretty good set of angles going on here with the pecs going up and the front deltoid, but you've not done the same on this side as well. So that needs to kind of fill in. Front deltoid needs to pop in here. And looking around the back, this generally looks pretty good. As far as angles go, I'd be, again, careful about this kind of modeling for these wrinkles. I know I put them in my little example, but maybe I shouldn't have. I don't want to give the wrong impression. The important thing is to set up the big volumes first, and often it's better to leave these things out if they're not going to be finished correctly. So it just looks a little bit better as a piece without that sort of extraneous detail or tiny detail. You have pretty good tension coming off the acromial section of the trapezius, and then down here the kind of the section off of the spine of the scapula looks good, tighter, and a little bit less volume because it's going thin. And the tail of the trapezius looks pretty good. Probably some of this needs to be made a little bit more subtle, and some of my layers are still on the back, so changing forms down here. Again, same things hold true down here with the spinal erectors. And again, remember, lats are pulled really thin in this type of position, so all this is going to be kind of rib cage almost, just thin layer of muscle over top of the rib cage. So just make sure it's continuous as it goes around from here to the stuff that we're seeing in the front. And in the front, Just last thing is costal cartilage, right? So costal cartilage and ribs. Just really understand what you're sculpting, so that you don't kind of create the wrong forms. So we're kind of sculpting all this convergence of costal cartilage coming off ribs, and then external obliques grabbing onto these ribs and the costal cartilage, right? So it's softening some more forms there. One thing I'm concerned about is just this expanse of nothing in here. Rarely is there a big flat plane on the body like that. There's always some subtle intermediate form that fills in. In this instance, it's no different. There's subtle convexities filling in here, which are, again, combinations of the higher ribs, costal cartilage, and also external obliques, right? So it just kind of breaks up the form, the flat planes, and puts something there, right? So it reads a little bit better. Where I've just kind of delineated the costal cartilage, we have abs going over it, right, to soften this, and skin and things going over here too. So this doesn't have to be so pronounced, right? But certainly when the abs or when the chest expands like this, there's a characteristic depression underneath the 8th rib in this area. So it's kind of, there's going to be a little bit of symmetry on both sides. So observe that and try to model accordingly. Okay, so just a quick little tidy there, and a little before and after. So just kind of putting, again, some intermediate subtle forms into what's already there. Okay, so overall, good work on this. I think there's a lot of good forms happening. I think there's just a lot of small modifications that need to tighten it up. But in general, you hit all the major points of the exercise for the articulation of the shoulders and the scapula and those rotations. Okay, so well done. I hope you learned something in this review, and good luck with the arms next week. Thanks.